it's just so unfair. It's a tragedy how it's gone literally backwards from centuries ago when it was a women's community event for a woman to give birth, and everybody would support her and lift her up and nurture her while she's going through it and let it happen naturally the way it should. And that's not the case anymore. And you have to really fight for that. You have to fight for that experience if that's what you want. So I'm Janelle Klosky. I'm an occupational therapist, and I have two little boys. They're 7 and 10, and I live in Holland, Michigan. Okay, so I moved to Seattle um, in 2007, and eventually my husband and I moved to Guam for a year from Seattle. So uh, we had this little year-long adventure in Guam, and it was during that time that my husband and I were like, okay, maybe we're ready to start like thinking about how this will look and how this will go, and are we both healthy enough to get pregnant. So by this time I was 31, and I think I'd stopped birth control years before that. I stopped birth control when I was 27 or something, and we were just using condoms. Um, but being really intentional about it. So I'd never had any like mishaps, what's like accidental pregnancies, never. It was always intentional. So we took this 2-week trip stateside, made these rounds all over a bunch of states, ended up in Seattle where I had an appointment with my gynecologist. My husband had an appointment to like get his fertility checked out. And meanwhile, I'm late for my period. And it, not for a second did I think I was pregnant. And we have these appointments with our healthcare providers in Seattle. And even as I was leaving my appointment with my husband, I was like, I mean, I am a few days late. We were literally walking out after talking about all this stuff. And I was like, I'm a few days late. Nobody had asked me, I guess, about my period and my gynecologist's fertility appointment. But on the way out, I was like, I'm a few days late. I guess it's possible that I'm pregnant. It's not impossible. But I was so convinced that I would have trouble getting pregnant that there was no way that this could be possible, right? um, so days went by. My husband, gave a sample. I was like waiting for my period, and we're literally packing up and on our way back to the airport to fly back to Guam. And we have Guam phones, so we're hard to get a hold of at this point. And I think the friends that we were staying with had maybe had a landline. I think their like the kitchen landline phone rang, and it was my doctor's office to let me know that I was pregnant. They're like, "You are so hard to get a hold of. We're trying to like let you know that you're pregnant." And I was like, "What?" It was like inconceivable to me. I just couldn't I could not believe it. I loved being pregnant. Um, I felt great, and the one thing happened early on, while we were still in Guam. I was still kind of a wild woman. I was really like, I was living on a tropical island, and I I love the ocean. I love the water, and there are so many things, so many fun things to do there. And I was in the Big Sister, um, little sister organization. So I was hanging out with my little sister, and we were jumping off of a bridge into the ocean, and I was like flipping around and doing all this stuff. I'm like, I know I'm pregnant at this point. I'm still like just having a great time. I'm like, oh, everything's cool. I don't know. Like, I can't explain myself at this point. Like, what? Um, so I did have, I don't know if it's because of that, but I did end up having a subchorionic hemorrhage, which means just a little section of the placenta detaches, which causes a bleed, which was absolutely terrifying. I mean, it happened like I was standing, I had this long maxi dress on. I was standing in my kitchen and like plop on the floor. I'm like, here I am thinking like, okay, here we go. I'm having a miscarriage already. And I think I was like it was so early, 7 weeks or so. Um, and I went, there was actually a birthing center right up the street from where we were living. And there was no doctor or nurse midwife available to examine me. So I had to go home and they're like, you know, come back tomorrow. All the while I'm terrified. The process of getting there, talking to them and then going home was awful. But once I remember when I got into bed that night, and I'm like so confused and sad and scared. But I remember having this feeling like I think everything's okay. I can tell he's there. I think it's cool. And I had like kind of this sense of calm came over me. Like I could feel that he was okay. Um, but I went, the next day and got checked out and they did an ultrasound and lo and behold, there's a heartbeat and he's cool. And that's when I got the diagnosis of the subchorionic hemorrhage and they're like, yeah, you just need to take it easy and it'll heal on its own. Everything should be fine. And it was completely healed by, I think, 11 weeks or so. So I took it easy. I did live on the third floor of an apartment building, no elevator. But other than that, I took it easy. Um, so other than that, throughout the pregnancy, it was fantastic. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have like the best delivery ever, the most peaceful birth. And I did everything I possibly could to prepare myself and my husband, choose my providers. In the meantime, like in the middle of the pregnancy, we moved to Southern California. So I had to find new providers. We took the Bradley method courses to prepare for birth. Um, there was, yeah, I was like, I'm ready. Like, let's bring it on. And my husband was ready. I brought in my closest friend to kind of assist us. And, I was planning to use midwives. However, I did arrange a backup OB to be on hand if something had gone wrong. And I met him, and he was known for not rushing into C-section whatsoever. So he kind of partnered with the birthing center that I was working with, and I felt like I'd covered all my bases. I took my classes. I was healthy, active. I didn't have any like no heartburn, no pain. I felt really great through the pregnancy. So it felt like really having to advocate for myself every step of the way constantly. Um, I had the time and the ability to teach myself, to learn, to read, to do the research, but not everybody wants to do that. A lot of women want to trust their providers and just kind of go with what is said needs to happen. And I learned early on that when I do it myself, it's better. But I wanted to have control over the situation. I wanted to be the one in charge. Me and my baby. It's about me and him. Honestly, I wanted to just, like, go into the woods and be alone. The thought of that, like, made me super happy, but my husband wasn't a big fan of that. Okay, um, but I really didn't want anybody around. Like, that's why I wanted it to be so minimal. I wanted my husband, I chose my best friend, and that's all I wanted. Not even my mom, she was heartbroken about that. I'm like, I don't want any outside chatter. I just wanna be in tune and present and figure this out for myself and let myself do it. The problem was that when my water started to leak, it didn't break. So it was just leak, leak, leak. And labor was slow to start. And eventually, 24, very like minimal contractions, and it was just not progressing very well. Um, my birthing center was like, oh, it's been 24 hours. And in that time, there had been a Foley balloon put in, which was awful. Interventions were starting. And I was like, okay, I had to go to the hospital, and I was laboring for like ever. I The good thing was that my doctor was not rushing me. My nurses were amazing. Everybody was doing what they were supposed to. I had a very detailed birth plan, and they were not to offer me any medication. They were just there to monitor, and like I could move around and kind of do what I wanted to do. But the snowball of interventions was creeping up. I started Pitocin, which was awful. Um, this whole thing. I did end up having him vaginally, but it was damaging to my pelvic floor, severely damaging. And what it came down to was that he was not positioned properly. He was posterior, and nobody in my environment recognized that. I was having back labor, just days for days of back labor. That is an indication. Now I know, I didn't know then. That means he's posterior and he needs to turn around. And nobody knew that that was the case and how to fix it. So, uh, I, long story short, oh God, I had a horrible, deep tear. Um, my OB eventually took him with a pull of forceps because he couldn't I mean, I went through a 3-hour phase of pushing. I even Yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. And I had a very deep layer tear when he finally did come out. The OB's stitching me up, you know. I'm holding my baby. I'm like, okay, I mean, as exhausted as I've ever been in my entire life. I've been laboring for 50 plus hours at this point, not allowed to eat. Um, so completely depleted. And uh, he's stitching me up, and he goes, "Oh no, we forgot the placenta." And I was like, "What?" Hmm? You're supposed to birth your placenta. So he had to go back in after he stitched me up after this horrendous tear, and the most the craziest birth ever, and pull my placenta out past the fresh tear and stitches. So not thrilled about that. Not thrilled about that. So I didn't poop for like 7 or 10 days. It was the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my whole life. My first bowel movement. Oh my God. I couldn't sit down for days without sitting on ice. The healing, the scar tissue. I mean, this was my journey into like my slow journey into pelvic health. Um, so the next time around, I won't. We'll be here all day if I tell you about the 2 losses in between. But by the time I was pregnant with my second child, I was like, gonna get a doula because I felt like I'd done everything I could. I did not regret anything that I'd done, except that I should have had a doula with me because that person would have known and would have recognized the symptoms of my labor to know what the baby was doing and know how to fix it. So that was the change that I made. I was still working with midwives. I was still planning to have you know, a, a quiet, birth that was mine and nobody else's. Um, but I picked this doula. I interviewed a bunch and I chose this doula. Oh God, her name was Gray. And she saved the day. The same thing happened. My babies just don't seem to want to come out quickly. My labor starts slow. I needed some help to losing my word, induce. They wanted to induce me, which was frustrating. Um anyway, my midwives are like, "Your child is huge. Um it's 40 weeks. There's no sign. There's no dilation. There's no sign that anything's going to get started here anytime soon. And we're not sure if you're going to be able to push him out." And I was like, what makes you think that? I haven't expressed any fear or concern about not being able to push my baby out. I've done it before. He was 9 pounds. I did it. I mean, position. It's the position of the baby and your ability to relax and feel safe. That's the ticket for birth. So they wanted me to have my second baby at the hospital. They're like, he's going to be enormous. We might have to like snap a clavicle. We might hit their shoulder dystocia is real. It might happen to you. I was like, okay. I was so I was so mad. I had to meet this OB that was like this doctor at the hospital. And everybody's just asking me like, do you think you can do this? Like, what do you think? Do you think you can push this baby out? I'm like, yeah, I do. I was just so angry. So angry. I had to leave the room. Either he was going to get punched in the throat or I had to leave the room when he asked me that question. The anger, I mean, I still, just thinking about that conversation was like, so I was like, I will never see you again. Like you will have nothing to do with me or the birth of my child. I know that much. So, okay, so I have to go through this. At this point, it's go time, and I've got this team that's like, you know, I'm not thrilled with, but um, individually, it was fine. It's just that when you're part of a system, this birthing center was part of a hospital system, so still the things from the medical model kind of creep in, and it felt like saying things like we might have to snap his clavicle or his humerus to get him out. We're not sure if you're going to be able to push him out. He looks huge. Like what? Um, that's not midwifery, in my opinion. So I was pretty upset about that. And thankfully, I had chosen this doula who was not associated with that system, and she was absolutely amazing. Finally, long story short, labor did begin. I was in uh, you know, full labor, and the same thing came up. He's posterior. I'm having back labor, and she's like, boom, on it. She knew my story from before, and uh, she's like, oh, there we go. Let's get down and do the miles circuit, and we're going to turn this baby around. We're spinning babies, and that's what needs to happen when when they don't cooperate, right? Um, so we did that, and it was excruciating. Don't get me wrong, but he turned. He ended up, you know, uh, in the right position, and I was able to have a quicker, lovely delivery with my second child, and he was bigger than my first. And it's just, yeah, I made sure that she knew because I told her my story, and I'm like, look, this can't happen to me. This can't happen again. She had all the skills doulas do. They are, I truly like fell in love with her after after delivery. I'm like, you just literally saved my life. And I am glad that I didn't, have any unnecessary C-sections. I know C-section is is necessary sometimes, but I think it's happening way more than it needs to, and women are not empowered to um, create their own birth story and to have control over how things go and let things happen and unfold the way that they should. And that's really sad. Um, but additionally, women aren't really preparing for being pregnant, for carrying a child, for delivering the child, and healing properly afterwards. So that's where I was like, this needs to be better. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been through this. I know I know the worst of it, and I know how it can be, and it's just so unfair. It's a tragedy how it's gone literally backwards from centuries ago when it was a it was a women's community event for a woman to give birth, and everybody would support her and lift her up and nurture her while she's going through it and let it happen naturally the way it should. Um, and that's not the case anymore. And you have to really fight for that. You have to fight for that experience if that's what you want. Uh, and again, I want to just reiterate that there is a place for medical intervention sometimes, of course, and I'm grateful that we have those resources available to us. I just wish it wasn't this like overarching um the norm. I wish it was more of the like the exception that women need that medical intervention. uh so many women are scared. I mean, when they're not supported through that process, of course they're scared to give birth. Of course. It can be scary. It can be terrifying. But if they're nurtured and let, if they learn that the experience that they're having is what needs to happen to progress their labor and delivery, that this is normal, that this is okay, there's no fear if you have the support that you need around you to guide you through it. And it's just it's so sad. after after I had my second child, I ended up with an undiagnosed case of postpartum depression. Not formally diagnosed. No, it wasn't caught by my medical team, but I was a complete and total mess. And I ended up going back to school, which is so strange, with a toddler and a newborn and a job and like, all these things. I'm like, I am going to go back to school for reflexology because I've like, I don't know. I was trying to keep myself busy and distracted and kind of inspired and motivated all at the same time and try to keep a sense of self too. Like that's a lot of I think what triggers postpartum depression is that there's maybe this lack of self after giving birth, and then you've got your existence is maintaining the life and health of these other individuals. So um I went back to school in a holistic health just at my local community college, and we had to write a business plan in our business class. And that's when I was like, I'm going through this. I literally was a total mess through this. I was crying in class. I was just a complete disaster. And one day in the business class, my teacher led us all in a meditation, and I completely fell apart during the meditation. And I was immediately surrounded by these women in my class. Like, I was living in a new city, state, just had a baby. I was lonely. I needed a village. I was just dying for a village, and I didn't have it. And these women just like surrounded me. Like, we're here. We're in this with you. We've got you. And that was the first feeling that I'd had, after having two losses. And this birth where I had to every step of the way advocate for myself. It was just so exhausting. Um, but I had this healthy, gorgeous baby. And I have these healthy, beautiful kids and this wonderful, supportive husband. And, there's so much to be grateful for. But there was just like, I was struggling. So anyway, Wanna Mama came about because I want women to not go through what what went through, at least to some degree. If I can alleviate or prevent any of that in any degree, I'm happy. I Every woman deserves to be supported and loved and nurtured through all of these things and allowed to tap into her own wisdom and her own strength and have the tools and the resources available to her to bring herself through it. So it started with me wanting to partner with, I knew pelvic health, like a pelvic floor therapist, needed to be included, but I wasn't intending to be that person. I had this, I guess I didn't realize that I could at the time. And I know now that OT is very well suited for pelvic health, although that is getting, the acceptance of that is getting better as well, like between the OT and the PT world. It's been very, heavy in the PT domain. OTs are holistic therapists. We address toileting, urination, bowel movements, activities of daily living, sex, all the things. It's sort of it's a unique approach. I'm an abdominal therapist as well and a certified sexuality OT. So I mentioned earlier, I really enjoy manual hands-on therapy. I think there's a lot of healing in it in general, and I see really amazing outcomes from it. So I keep doing it and I love it. I have, there's a very deep place in my heart for women who have struggled, who have been dismissed, and who have not been heard and not allowed to speak their truth and experience their truth, and have not been nurtured in a way that allowed them to listen to what their body was telling them, being told that they're wrong, or no, you relax, you're just anxious, or you're fine, or there's nothing wrong, it's all in your head. I mean, those are real things that women are being told all the time. My last message, I think, is to take time in choosing your providers, and it's okay if the provider that you're in front of isn't making you feel good, to leave and try another one. If it doesn't feel right, you do not have to listen. You don't have to get a second and a third opinion, and find somebody who is willing to sit down and make you take the time to listen and make you feel seen and heard, and make sure that your concerns are being validated, and that it feels like it's a partnership in your health.